Okay, here's a totally wild fact for you. If you look at the ancient Greeks, the Norsemen, indigenous tribes across the Americas, these are cultures separated by literal oceans and centuries, right? They never spoke a single word to each other. Yet they all share these terrifyingly similar stories about humans transforming into wolves. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. It's this completely universal monster that's haunted our imaginations for millennia, eventually giving us the massive blockbuster cinematic universes we have today. So let's just dive right into this explainer. We're going to explore whether these ancient legends are just, a product of fear and folklore, or if there's actually a real biological reality buried deep within the history of lycanthropy. Let's peel back the layers of this myth together.
So, are werewolves actually real? It sounds like a simple question, but the answer is surprisingly complex. To cut through the clickbait and really get to the truth, we've got to look past the Hollywood monsters, right? We need to set aside the CGI, the silver bullets, the full moons, and instead look at the hard documented evidence our ancestors actually left behind. And honestly, understanding this matters so much today, because when we figure out why our ancestors invented these monsters, we uncover some incredibly revealing truths about human psychology, how we process fear, and really how we treat the things we just don't understand. We're going to treat this not as a ghost story, but as a genuine historical and scientific investigation.
Here's how we're going to break it down today. First, investigating with data. Then we'll look through the psychological lens, followed by the historical lens and the biological lens. And finally, number 5, we'll deliver the final verdict.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, investigating with data. Let's see how we build a foundation of facts rather than superstition.
To get to the bottom of this, I didn't just, turn to the open internet where literally anyone can post a spooky story. Instead, we took a very specific approach. By keeping our research strictly grounded in vetted medical and historical texts using NotebookLM, we made sure every single insight is tied directly to a reliable citation. Basically, I uploaded actual historical archives dating way back to the 1500s, including original trial transcripts from the European witch hunts. Then I pulled formal psychiatric studies from modern medical journals, detailing rare neurological disorders, plus some really detailed anthropological reports on human genetics. The beauty of this process is the self-correction. The AI helps map out the different analytical lenses, but absolutely every insight is tied to a specific, verifiable citation from these centuries-old records and peer-reviewed papers. It's a real game changer because this is how we know exactly where our info is coming from, making sure we're analyzing facts, not fiction.
Moving right along to Section 2, the psychological lens. This is where we shift focus from physical monsters to the human mind. So, the psychiatric studies we uploaded reveal rare but very real documented cases of something called clinical lycanthropy. Now, this isn't a metaphor. This is a recognized actual psychiatric syndrome. It shows us exactly how some individuals genuinely deeply believe they were undergoing a physical transformation into a wolf. For example, our sources point to documented medical case studies where patients reported feeling their teeth actually growing longer, or they'd experienced this overwhelming urge to sleep out in the woods and consume raw meat. In one incredibly fascinating case from a modern psychiatric journal, a patient actively howled and claimed to feel fur sprouting from their skin. They experienced profound distress because, well, their brain was sending them completely fabricated physical sensations. Just imagine the absolute terror and confusion of experiencing that delusion firsthand. Now zoom out a bit. Imagine being a family member or a doctor observing this behavior in a small village way before modern psychiatric medicine even existed. To the observer and to the patient, the werewolf was undeniably present. It was a terrifying reality constructed entirely by the brain.
Okay, Section 3, the historical lens. Let's look at the 16th century panic and the societal reaction to all of this.
Our historical archives take us straight into the dark heart of 16th century Europe, and the timeline here maps out a truly terrifying progression. Look at this. In the 1520s, unexplained violent crimes start sparking intense local fear. Fast forward to the 1550s, and this fear ferments into an absolute rise of mass hysteria across entire communities. And by the 1590s, that hysteria becomes institutionalized. We're talking widespread, literal wolf trials established all across Europe. The public essentially used the concept of the werewolf as a scapegoat to just explain away horrifying, unsolved crimes. A chilling example from our text is the infamous case of Peter Stump in 1589. Stump was a wealthy farmer in Germany who was accused of being a werewolf. Under extreme torture, he ultimately confessed to possessing a magical belt that turned him into a wolf to commit heinous murders. But here's the thing. The trial didn't focus on evidence. It focused entirely on paranoia. The legal arguments were completely absurd by today's standards, relying totally on forced confessions and local gossip. And his punishment? Unimaginably grim. It was a public execution designed to cleanse the town of a supernatural evil that, quite frankly, never actually existed. When society couldn't understand the evil that humans were capable of inflicting upon one another, they simply blamed a monster.
Which brings us to Section 4, the biological lens. Time to look at the physical evidence.
This is where the anthropological reports provide a truly stunning revelation. When we review the vetted sources, we see that rare genetic conditions, specifically one called hypertrichosis, could have heavily fueled these legends. Now, hypertrichosis is characterized by excessive and abnormal hair growth all over the body, and that includes the face. The visual reality of this condition is striking. Our sources highlight historical figures like Petrus Gonsalves, who lived back in the 1500s. He was born with hypertrichosis, and tragically, because of his appearance, he was treated as a literal wild man or a beast. He was even given as a gift to the King of France, kept almost like a royal pet rather than a human being. Now put yourself in the shoes of a 16th century villager for a second. You have absolutely zero understanding of genetics, DNA, or inherited traits. If someone in your village was born with this condition, it provided terrifying visual proof to an already incredibly superstitious society. They saw a human covered in thick hair, and their fear-conditioned minds just immediately filled in the rest of the monstrous details. It's a profoundly tragic history where simple biology was heartbreakingly mistaken for dark magic.
All right, Section 5, the final verdict. Let's break down the myth versus the reality. So, we're back to our main question. Are werewolves real? Well, in the supernatural sense, the Hollywood monsters, the physical shape-shifting beasts howling at a full moon, no. But in the context of human reality, they are incredibly real. NotebookLM helped us connect medieval superstition to modern science, proving that werewolves actually represent a very profound human experience. They're basically mirrors for our deepest fears. They represent tragic misunderstandings of mental health conditions like clinical lycanthropy and genetic anomalies like hypertrichosis. And really, they are the ultimate symbol of historical scapegoating during times of mass hysteria. And why does this matter today? Because while we don't hold wolf trials anymore, human beings still have this incredibly strong psychological tendency to demonize what we don't understand. We still scapegoat, we definitely still let fear override facts. Our ancestors interpreted the world through monsters, and the werewolf was simply one of their most powerful tools for making sense of a frightening, unpredictable world.
The way we approach this explainer is exactly how you should approach any big question. If you want to dive into the deep end of any mystery, whether it's ancient folklore, a historical cold case, or even the latest scientific debate, don't just rely on hearsay. Grab your vetted sources, start a notebook, and let the hard data guide you to the truth. Just imagine what happens when you apply this exact same vetted data approach to vampires, or sea monsters, or even modern conspiracy theories that spread like wildfire online. You strip away the fiction, and you're left with a clear, unfiltered view of human history. NotebookLM helped connect the dots here in a way that honestly just wouldn't be possible by blindly searching the web.
You'll be genuinely surprised at what you uncover when you look strictly at the evidence. The truth is almost always vastly more fascinating and far more human than the fiction. As we've seen today, the real monsters were never actually hiding in the woods. They were hiding in our DNA, our psychology, and our history. So, what mystery should we investigate next?